Can someone please explain to me why we are allowing oil companies to knowingly pollute our oceans? Why are we letting them leave inadequate infrastructure that is leaking oil into the ocean at an unimaginable rate? Why is the cleanup fund so underfunded? Why has this policy still not been reformed? Right now, at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, there are 14,000 abandoned oil wells. Leaking. Corroding. Slowly poisoning one of the most biologically rich bodies of water on Earth. And almost nobody is talking about it. The companies that drilled them? Many of them are gone, bankrupt, dissolved, vanished. The cleanup bill? Somewhere between $40 and $70 billion. And the money set aside to actually pay for it? $3.5 billion. You do the math. Because somebody is going to pay. And if history is any guide, that somebody is you. Today, we're going underneath the surface, literally, to expose one of the most dangerous, most undercovered environmental crises in American history. Section 1. Setting the scene. What's actually down there? To understand the scope of what we're dealing with, you need to picture the Gulf of Mexico not as a body of water, but as an industrial dumping ground in slow motion. Since the 1940s, the offshore oil and gas industry has installed more than 55,000 wells and 7,000 platforms on America's outer continental shelf. The vast majority of them are in the Gulf of Mexico. For decades, they pumped billions of barrels of oil, made billions of dollars in profit, and were celebrated as symbols of American energy dominance. But here's what happens when the oil runs out. The wells go idle. The platforms stop producing. And legally, the companies that own them are required, by federal law, to plug those wells, remove those platforms, and restore the seafloor. It's part of the deal they sign when they get their federal lease. The problem? They're not doing it. As of June 2023, more than 2,700 wells and 500 platforms in the Gulf were overdue for decommissioning. That means they blew past their legal cleanup deadlines. And the federal agencies responsible for enforcing those deadlines? According to a scathing report from the Government Accountability Office, that's the nonpartisan watchdog arm of Congress, those agencies have been, and I'm going to quote directly here, ineffective. Not underfunded. Not understaffed. Ineffective. But it gets worse. Way worse. Section 2, the scale. 14,000 wells and counting. Let me give you a number that I want you to sit with for a second. 14,000. That is the number of non-producing oil and gas wells currently sitting at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. Not 2,000. Not 5,000. 14,000. A study published in the journal Nature Energy found that the majority of these wells have been idle for at least 5 years, which means they are almost certainly never going back into production. They are, for all practical purposes, abandoned. And here's the kicker, there are now more unplugged, non-producing wells in the Gulf than there are active ones. Read that again. There are more dead, leaking, corroding wells than working ones. We have built a ghost town at the bottom of the ocean, and we just left. Now you might be thinking, okay, they're just sitting there. How bad can it really be? Here's how bad. Abandoned wells leak. They leak oil. They leak methane, a greenhouse gas 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide over a 20-year period. They leak carcinogenic chemicals like benzene and arsenic directly into the water column. And because many of these wells are in remote deepwater locations or buried under sediment, those leaks can go completely undetected for years. Sometimes decades. And then there are the pipelines. Nearly 18,000 miles of pipeline have been authorized by federal regulators to simply remain on the seafloor, what they call decommissioning in place. That sounds like a plan. It's not a plan. It's a legal way of saying, we're leaving it there and hoping for the best. Section 3, Deepwater Horizon Shadow. We were warned. April 20, 2010. The Deepwater Horizon explodes in the Gulf of Mexico. 11 workers are killed. Over 87 days, an estimated 134 million gallons of oil pour into the Gulf, more than 12 times the volume of the Exxon Valdez disaster. It was supposed to be a wake-up call. It wasn't. Because here's what most people don't know about Deepwater Horizon. The damage never stopped. Almost 100 million gallons of oil and chemical dispersants are still believed to remain in the Gulf. A 2024 study found severe or moderate damage to biodiversity across an area of ocean nearly 9 times larger than previously reported. Coral communities near the wrecked site are still showing signs of stress, weak, brittle oozing. And in 2020, researchers discovered that toxic, Invisible oil from the spill had spread all the way to the shores of Texas and toward Miami, 30% further than anyone had previously estimated. And while the world was focused on Deepwater Horizon, while BP was writing checks and politicians were making speeches, the quiet crisis of abandoned wells was growing. Silently. Steadily. With virtually no public attention. In fact, right now, as you watch this video, there is an oil well off the coast of Louisiana, owned by a company called Taylor Energy, that has been leaking continuously since 2004. Every single day. Between 300 and 700 barrels of oil. Do the math on how many years that's been going. Scientists estimate that wells reserves could keep it leaking for another 100 years if it isn't properly capped. That story barely made the news. Section 4, the money problem. Who's going to pay? Here is where this story stops being just an environmental issue and becomes a story about your money. When an oil company gets a federal lease to drill in the Gulf of Mexico, they sign an agreement saying they will pay to clean up whatever they drill. To back that up, they're supposed to post financial bonds, basically a security deposit, that the government can cash if the company walks away. The estimated cost to decommission all Gulf of Mexico oil and gas infrastructure, active and idle, is somewhere between $40 billion and $70 billion. The amount the federal government currently holds in bonds? $3.5 billion. That is not a rounding error. That is a canyon. A gap so enormous that if even a fraction of these companies go bankrupt, and many already have, American taxpayers will be stuck with a cleanup bill that could dwarf the cost of the 2008 financial bailout over time. And bankruptcies are not hypothetical. They've been happening for years. When an oil company goes under, its decommissioning obligations don't just disappear, they get passed down a chain of previous owners and leaseholders, many of whom are also broke or dissolved. Eventually, that liability lands at the feet of the federal government. And the federal government's money is your money. The Government Accountability Office made this crystal clear in a 2024 report. The system is broken. The watchdog said it plainly. And what happened? Gulf state governments, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas, sued to block a new rule that would have required stronger financial guarantees from oil companies before they could walk away from their wells. Their argument? It would hurt small oil companies. My argument? You can't drill a hole in the ocean floor, extract billions of dollars in profit, and then hand the cleanup bill to the public. That's not capitalism. That's a scam. Section 5, the regulatory failure. The watchdogs that don't bark. Two federal agencies are supposed to be keeping the oil industry in check in the Gulf. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, BOEM, and the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, BSEE. Their job is to make sure companies meet their decommissioning deadlines, post adequate financial bonds, and actually clean up after themselves. So how are they doing? According to the GAO, for Gulf leases that ended between 2010 and 2022, operators missed BSEE's one-year decommissioning deadline for more than 40% of wells and more than 50% of platforms. Think about that. More than half of all platforms that should have been removed weren't. And what happened to the companies that blew those deadlines? They got what essentially amounts to a strongly worded letter. The GAO found that BSEE's primary enforcement tools, citations and orders to comply, are, quote, essentially warnings. Civil penalty fines are rare and take years to collect. Disqualifying an operator from future leases? Almost never happens, and the criteria for doing so is so vague it's basically unenforceable. Former regulators who worked under the Biden administration, people who were on the inside trying to fix this, have spoken openly about what they faced. Staffing cuts. Data gaps. Wells going idle with no follow-up. An appeals board so understaffed that enforcement cases sat pending for years. One former regulator described taking enforcement actions without clear legal authority simply because there was no other option. And now, under the current administration, the situation is moving in reverse. An executive order has been issued requiring federal agencies to establish sunset rules for all existing offshore drilling regulations, meaning safety protections could automatically expire unless agencies take affirmative steps to renew them. The Unleashing American Energy executive order also directs agencies to roll back policies deemed burdensome for fossil fuel development. Meanwhile, the backlog grows. Section 6, Hurricanes and the Ticking Clock. The climate wildcard. There is one more variable in this equation that makes everything more urgent and more dangerous. Hurricanes. The Gulf of Mexico is one of the most hurricane-prone bodies of water on Earth. And as the climate warms, those storms are intensifying. A warmer Gulf means more rapid intensification, storms that go from tropical depression to Category 4 in a matter of hours. And aging, corroding, abandoned oil infrastructure is spectacularly ill-suited to survive a major hurricane. We don't have to speculate about this. We have real-world evidence. When Hurricane Beryl, a Category 4 storm, crossed the Gulf of Mexico, it triggered an oil spill from an abandoned offshore platform that had never been properly decommissioned. That's not a freak accident. That's a preview. Scientists estimate that almost half of the remaining active wells in the Gulf are already approaching or past the end of their useful life. As storms get stronger and infrastructure gets older, the probability of catastrophic failures doesn't go up a little. It goes up a lot. We built an industrial empire at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. We extracted the wealth. And now we're in a race against physics, corrosion, pressure, storm surge, to clean it up before it cleans us out. Section 7, what could be done? There is a better way. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not here to tell you that offshore oil is evil and everyone involved is a villain and we should all live in the dark. That's not a serious conversation. But I am here to tell you that the system governing the cleanup of this infrastructure is corrupt, underfunded, and captured by the industry it's supposed to regulate. And that is fixable. There are real policy solutions on the table. Stronger bonding requirements, so companies have to put up real money before they drill, not after they're already broke. Stricter and faster enforcement with actual financial penalties that sting. Transparent public reporting on which wells are leaking and which companies are delinquent. There's also a genuinely exciting idea gaining traction in the scientific community, repurposing some of this aging infrastructure for clean energy. Researchers at the University of Houston found that many of these old platforms could be converted to support offshore wind turbines or green hydrogen production. The pipelines already on the seafloor could transport hydrogen to shore. It's not a silver bullet, but it's a way to turn a liability into an asset, and it could help offset some of the staggering cleanup costs. The question isn't whether we can fix this. The question is whether we have the political will to make the industry that created this mess actually pay for it. 14,000 abandoned wells. A cleanup bill of up to $70 billion. A government holding only $3.5 billion in bonds to cover it. Hurricanes getting stronger. Regulations getting weaker. And a public that largely has no idea any of this is happening. That's the story. That's the crisis. And it is happening right now, in American waters, with American wildlife, on American taxpayers' dime. The oil companies got rich. They got their profits. They got their tax breaks. And when the wells ran dry, they handed us the check and walked out the door. We deserve better than that. The Gulf deserves better than that. If this video opened your eyes, please share it. This is exactly the kind of story that depends on regular people spreading it, because you can be sure the industry lobbying against cleanup rules has a very well-funded PR machine making sure you never hear about it. So why are we not holding these companies accountable? Why are there oil rigs in operation today that are actively leaking oil into the ocean? Why are they not shut down until the leak has been fixed? We are allowing them to continue to operate, making record profits, while their inadequate infrastructure is actively destroying the environment. Hit subscribe. Leave a comment. Tell me what you think. And I'll see you in the next one.